Florida spends millions every year getting rid of something that could be worth billions. Across the Gulf Coast and Atlantic shoreline, beaches are being buried under mountains of rotting brown seaweed. You can smell it before you see it. Tourists avoid it, hotels lose bookings, cities spend millions just to keep the beaches usable. Sargassum seaweed arrives every summer, and each year it feels like it's getting worse and worse. But China has found a way to turn it into a multi-billion-dollar industry, while the US is missing out. Drive south on I-95 in July between Palm Beach and Miami, and the smell finds you before the beach does. Then you'll see it. A brown wall of rotting seaweed stretching for miles along the shoreline. Every morning, tractors scoop it up, they rake it, they haul it away by the truckload, and by sunset, more has arrived, and the cycle starts again. The sand at South Point Park in May 2026 looked less like a beach and more like wet brown mud. 3 tractors worked it for over an hour as beachgoers stepped over the thick piles to reach the water. At Ball Harbor, Victoria Brossman gave up on her vacation and went home. She told the Miami Herald her family had even tried a hotel on Key Biscayne, hoping for cleaner sand, but they found the same problem. The photos from that trip, she said, stay with her family as a reminder that Florida is no longer the beach vacation it used to be. This is a scenario that plays out in every coastal county in the state every single summer. The University of South Florida has been tracking the bloom from space for years. Their satellite system clocked 37.5 million tons of sargassum floating across the Atlantic in 2025. By March of 2026, the new season had already piled up 13.6 million tons, about a third more than the same point a year earlier. If the trend holds, 2026 will break every record that 2025 set before the summer is over. Before 2011, nothing on the scale of the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt existed. The original source was the Sargasso Sea, the only sea on Earth that has no coastline. No land borders it on any side. It sits in the middle of the North Atlantic, defined entirely by 4 ocean currents that rotate around it like walls. The Gulf Stream to the west, the North Atlantic Current to the north, the Canary Current to the east, and the North Equatorial Current to the south. The sea exists because the currents create it, a rotating gyre that traps whatever floats into it. For centuries, sailors feared it. The currents that define its boundaries also claimed ships inside it for weeks. The floating seaweed, which Columbus described in his logs in 1492, was thick enough in places that early sailors believed it could snare a hull. It can't, but the myth persisted long enough to give the Bermuda Triangle half of its mythology. The Sargasso Sea is where the Atlantic eel goes to spawn, and where young sea turtles spend their first years of life floating in the weed. It is one of the most biologically important bodies of water on Earth, and one of the least understood. Then, something changed. The bloom that had quietly sat inside that rotating gyre for millennia began to escape it. Most of the working theories point to the same triggers. A combination of warmer water and nutrient-rich runoff created a massive new seaweed belt stretching thousands of miles across the Atlantic. Every year it grows, sending wave after wave toward the Caribbean and the southeastern United States. A 2026 paper from the University of Miami Rosenthal School of Marine, Atmospheric, and Earth Science pinned the origin down more clearly than anyone had managed before. Lead author Francisco Baranvera and his team built a new ocean current model and used it to trace the first big bloom back to coastal waters off the Gulf of Guinea in West Africa. The bloom wasn't discovered when it started. By the time satellites spotted it in 2011, researchers believe it had already been growing for nearly 2 years. The first warning signs came when unusual mats of seaweed began washing ashore in Ghana back in 2009. The trigger that year was a cold water event called a Dakar Niña, a rare combination of nutrient-rich deep water and mineral-laden Saharan dust supercharged growth in the tropical Atlantic. That combination kicked off what would become the biggest seaweed bloom on Earth. It's not some kind of freak event either. The volume is predictable and can be planned around. It can be turned into a product. Every country that catches part of the bloom has started utilizing it, except the United States. A 2026 Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution study put Florida's annual losses in tourism and fishing alone at around $2.7 billion. And then there's the indirect damage. Restaurants with less bookings, canceled charters, hotel rooms that stay empty. In total, it runs closer to $5 billion in an average year. In a severe season, the same model jumps to $10 billion, and the worst case run for 2026 came in at $13.5 billion. Southeast Florida absorbs the bulk of it. The corridor from Palm Beach down through Miami-Dade is, by the study's own data, the most exposed strip in the country. Cleaning it up doesn't come cheap. Miami-Dade spends $4 million every year removing seaweed from a small number of beaches. Other coastal cities spend millions more. By the time the seaweed is collected and dumped, the annual cost across the region hits $35 million. Across the wider Gulf and Atlantic coast, the bill runs into hundreds of millions. Every dollar is spent collecting a resource and burying it in a landfill. The health aspect can't be downplayed either. As the seaweed rots on the sand, it releases hydrogen sulfide gas, the same rotten egg odor that comes off industrial wastewater. In high enough amounts, it triggers headaches, breathing problems, and even ER visits. Cuba issued a maximum health alert in 2025 when the mats overwhelmed its eastern coast. Florida agencies have started running air quality checks at hit beaches, though no statewide alert system exists yet. The problem, though, runs all the way around the Gulf. On Galveston Island in Texas, crews have faced so much incoming sargassum that they ran out of room to store it along the seawall. So they loaded it onto trucks and hauled it across the island to East Beach. A naturally occurring material arrives in such enormous quantities that local governments spend millions collecting it, transporting it, and searching for places to dump it. On April 29, 2026, a Galveston resident named Steve told Houston Public Media he had visited the island for 65 years and had never seen sargassum build up like it. NOAA noticed as well. That same month, the agency upgraded its sargassum reports from weekly to daily updates. The goal wasn't to help companies harvest the material, it was to help local officials figure out where to send tractors and cleanup crews. That's where the United States is today. We're building better systems to track the seaweed, but no better systems to actually use it. And according to the University of South Florida's 2026 Outlook, the problem may soon expand into new areas of Louisiana. The cleanup costs are going to hit communities that haven't faced them before. Texas A&M built a satellite-based warning system more than a decade ago. Researchers can track sargassum across the Atlantic and forecast when large arrivals are headed toward the Texas coast. But the forecasts don't tell businesses when to harvest, just when to start the tractors. And while Florida buries the seaweed, other countries are getting rich off of it. In Cancun, Tulum, entrepreneur Omar Vasquez Sanchez took a different approach. His company, Blue Green Mexico, has been making construction blocks out of sargassum since 2018. A machine mixes roughly 40% sargassum with other organic materials, much of it sourced from discarded construction dirt. The mixture is compressed into construction bricks known as sarga blocks. 3,000 are turned out each day. Vasquez was running a plant nursery when the sargassum invasion of 2015 hit. Hotels started paying his crew to clean their beaches. Then he had an idea to turn it into building material. The first house he built from his own blocks went up next to his nursery. The team grew to 16 full-time workers, and in peak season, around 300 people work on his coastal cleanup crews. The National Autonomous University of Mexico tested the blocks and confirmed they meet the same building standards as adobe, with matching compression strength. A sarga block house costs about half what a regular brick house costs. Vasquez has now built over 40 homes from the material. The first one, Casa Angelita, has lived through 5 hurricanes and 6 tropical storms. His operation has used nearly 6,000 tons of seaweed since 2021. The most important thing about sargassum isn't that it can be turned into one product. It's that it can be turned into many. That's what companies like Carbon Wave are proving. At its facility in Puerto Rico, the company extracts high-value compounds from sargassum and sells them into multiple markets. One product replaces silicone in cosmetic formulations and is now targeting the K-beauty market. Their products are also used in agriculture and as a leather replacement. That's what a biorefinery does. One raw material goes in, multiple revenue streams come out. Every ton of seaweed can be broken apart into different products, each with its own customer and profit margin. And Carbon Wave is not alone. Across the Caribbean, governments and companies are racing to build processing capacity. Barbados is experimenting with turning sargassum into fuel. Grenada and the Dominican Republic are setting yearly processing targets that scale up every year. And Europe moved even further ahead. Processing facilities in France and Portugal already receive Caribbean sargassum and convert it into industrial ingredients for agriculture and pharmaceuticals. Major manufacturers have acquired processing companies and integrated the supply chain. Most of the alginate that hits the world market passes through Chinese plants, and that includes the alginate that ends up in American food and American medicine. The country built that position over the best part of 20 years of state-backed seaweed processing. Whatever capacity China has built can be turned on the Atlantic bloom whenever the country decides it's worth the freight. The chemistry behind all of this is simpler than people assume. 1 ton of wet sargassum gets you several products in one run. The cell walls hold alginate, a thickener that shows up in ice cream, dental molds, and slow-release medicine capsules. The food-grade alginate market alone is worth several $100 million a year. The pharma-grade version sells at about 10 times the price per pound. The fronds carry fucoidants, which are sugars now in clinical trials as anti-inflammatory and cancer drugs. And the plant matter also contains polyphenols with antioxidant activity. The remaining biomass can still be used in agriculture because much of its nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium remains behind. In a well-designed biorefinery, almost nothing is wasted. But the most interesting fact isn't that it's in ice cream. Pharma-grade alginate is a direct input into the medical supply chain that the US military depends on in combat. Almost all of it is processed in China. During COVID, the Pentagon conducted emergency reviews of pharmaceutical supply chain vulnerabilities. Alginate was among the categories flagged as a material with near-total dependence on Chinese plants. China has already demonstrated that it'll restrict strategic exports when the timing suits. We've seen it with gallium, germanium, and graphite. Alginate isn't on that list, though. Not yet. But the raw material that can beat any future restrictions is washing onto America's beaches every summer and being buried in landfills. The same seaweed that smells bad on a Miami beach in July is the same seaweed that can help a wounded American soldier from bleeding out. The supply chain connecting those two facts runs entirely through Chinese facilities. As of mid-2026, not a single large-scale commercial sargassum biorefinery operates in the continental United States, and there's a reason for that. Fresh sargassum is roughly 80% water by weight. When a truck hauls the seaweed to a landfill, most of what it's actually transporting is water. It's roughly 4 pounds of water for every 1 pound of actual plant matter. The cost per ton balloons because of all that water. A drying system can pull the moisture down to 20% before any transport, cutting hauling costs by close to 80%. The technology already exists, but what's missing are the incentives. Most cleanup contracts pay for removing wet seaweed, not processing dry biomass. The system rewards disposal, not utilization. And then there's the actual workers. A cleanup operation creates seasonal hauling jobs. A processing industry creates technicians, chemists, plant operators, vessel crews, engineers, and sales teams. One model pays people to move the problem, and the other pays people to solve it. The problem here isn't the science or the desire, it's simply the policy. By 2025, even NOAA was acknowledging the problem. The agency published a report on how sargassum is managed in the United States. The report cataloged permits, agencies, overlapping jurisdictions, and regulatory gaps. It explained who is responsible for what, but not the next steps. In other words, the government can tell you how to remove sargassum. It can't tell you how to profit from it. But one American company decided to try anyway. Algus Organics was founded in 2014 by Johannan Dujan. The Florida-based company collects sargassum and ferments it with a patented method. Dujan then sells the output as an organic biostimulant. According to the company's own filings with NOAA, the product is being used on more than 5,000 acres across the United States. Field trials show farmers save up to 20% on chemical fertilizer costs, with yields rising by an average of $990 per acre. The company ships to 10 countries and processes over 1 million pounds of sargassum every year. Dujon started Algus Organics in his parents' garage at age 21, after watching the sargassum invasion gut his home island's tourism and fishing economy. The government would pay millions to clean the beaches, and the next day the seaweed was back. He decided to ask a different question. What if it wasn't waste? In 2020, Forbes put him on the 30 under 30 list for manufacturing. The Inter-American Development Bank now co-funds his work. The company sells its product on Amazon. In 2024, the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority gave Algus Organics a $100,000 investment to pilot a mobile fermentation pod, a shipping container fitted with tanks that can process seaweed right at the beach. The company is now raising a $4 million seed round to grow its Florida operations. That, more or less, is the whole shape of the American sargassum industry. One company, about 1 million pounds a year. Set that against the 38 million tons that the bloom now puts out across the Atlantic every year. The University of South Florida estimates the Caribbean alone holds enough biomass to fertilize every farm in America. The US uses a fraction of 1% of what washes up. Algus Organics is growing slowly. The demand is there. Fertilizer prices have climbed. Organic farm inputs are the fastest growing slice of the agriculture market. The thing holding the company back is the permit process. Every step runs into the same wall that killed the earlier attempts in the 2010s. Meanwhile, the sargassum problem gets bigger. The seaweed locks up carbon while it grows. The mat doubles in size every 10 to 21 days as it pulls CO2 out of seawater to build new tissue. 1 wet ton traps over 400 pounds of carbon. When it rots in a landfill, much of it eventually returns to the atmosphere as greenhouse gases, including methane, one of the most potent warming gases on Earth. In other words, the cleanup strategy can end up reinforcing part of the problem it was responding to. Carbon markets are now trying to assign value to sargassum removal. The Vera and Gold Standard offset programs are building rules for seaweed-based carbon removal. A plant that processes sargassum into long-lived goods could earn credit streams worth tens of millions of dollars a year on top of product sales. Take a single large cleanup volume, around 100,000 wet tons, similar to what a major coastal region can face in a heavy year. If that same biomass is processed instead of dumped, even conservative industrial estimates suggest there's around $40 million in extractable compounds alone. The biostimulant content is worth another $15 to $20 million. The biogas potential adds $5 million. Speculative carbon credit projections would add several million more. That is one county. The total value buried in Florida and Texas landfills each year sits well into the hundreds of millions. The bill the cities pay to remove it can be added to that. Every season, the same money gets thrown away twice. A real industry needs more than one startup. It needs plants that can take in millions of tons of biomass and turn it into uniform, sellable goods. That is what the Caribbean and Latin America have been building while America hauls. The next wave of harvest equipment is already being built elsewhere. Seaweed Generation, a UK firm, is testing a solar-powered robot harvester called Gyre that scoops mats while they're still out in open water, before they rot. The current pilot operates in Caribbean waters on UK government grant money. The system carries cameras and sound sensors on board to keep the work clear of sea turtle roots and fish nursery zones in the floating mats. A partner firm, Seafields, won an Innovate UK grant of about $315,000 to test a different idea: growing sargassum on purpose in controlled patches of the mid-Atlantic. The aim is to move toward catch-and-grow farms. Germany is also getting in on the act, turning sargassum into ethanol for long-lasting plastics. Every one of these companies is run by European-led groups using American university research as input. There are 0 American operators sitting on the commercial side. Every one of these plants is a contract American producers can't bid on. They are relationships a US refinery, if one existed at scale, would be locked out of. With every moment that passes, the structure locks in deeper. And some people are happy with that. Every year, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and other Gulf states put out cleanup contracts that go to waste haulers and beach services firms paid by the ton. The more seaweed shows up, the more they bill. Raker LLC is the lead player in Miami-Dade, but the same model runs in Broward for Fort Lauderdale, in Palm Beach County, and across the Florida Keys. Each county sets its own bid, with contracts paying by event or by ton and renewing on annual budget cycles. The contractors have built whole fleets around the work, with trucks, loaders, and dump site deals with landfill operators. Once that system is in place, changing it becomes difficult. Any shift that moves sargassum away from existing disposal contracts immediately collides with investments that have already been made in trucks, crews, and landfill workflows. The resistance rarely appears in public lobbying campaigns. It shows up in conversations between county officials and state representatives, where the same concern is repeated in different forms. A new system would take time to build. Beaches still need to be cleaned during that transition. Someone still has to show up the next morning when the seaweed arrives. The bidding process tells the same story. In 2025, Miami-Dade put out a new sargassum cleanup contract for public bid. 5 companies sent in proposals, but 2 got thrown out by the county attorney's office. One firm failed to submit the right price information. Another sent its bid by email instead of through the official portal. That left 3 working proposals. Raker won the contract even though it wasn't the lowest bidder, with the county citing experience and equipment. That single detail tells you what the contract is really for. It's not at its core a tonnage problem, but just a hauling one. The whole structure is built around the truck route to the landfill. Raker itself has been in Florida for over 40 years, working in Monroe, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. Their main job before sargassum got bad was sand sifting and turtle nest monitoring, along with some dune restoration. The same equipment they used for general trash removal in the 2000s now runs full-time on seaweed. The business shifted as the bloom grew. As of 2026, it's one of the steadiest contract pipelines in coastal Florida. State proposals run into a second barrier above the local one. 3 federal agencies have a hand in any commercial harvest. None of them carries a mandate to coordinate with the others on building an industry. NOAA, through the National Marine Fisheries Service, lists sargassum as an essential fish habitat. That triggers consultations for any work that touches the habitat. The same mats are rated critical habitat for loggerhead sea turtles, adding a take avoidance review layer on top of that. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers requires permits for any in-water work or any discharge. A commercial harvest boat in federal waters needs both. The EPA covers the disposal side, with any liquid discharge from a processing plant going through its review. The Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, run by NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, adds one more permit for any work inside its lines. Their permits aren't valid until the applicant has cleared every other federal, state, and local approval. That one sentence is where American sargassum harvest plans go to die. Each agency has a fair claim, none can sign off for the others. A would-be operator has to file with NOAA, then the Army Corps, then the EPA, then the Florida DEP, and then the South Florida Water Management District, and then the local Marine Sanctuary Office. Several builders tried this in the early 2010s and met resistance. Their timelines ran past 3 years and legal bills climbed into the high 6 figures before any of them ever launched a boat. The market, of course, didn't wait. It went to China and Europe. Above all of that sits a single roadblock. Most of the sargassum that hits Florida isn't in state waters when it could be caught most easily. It floats in the Federal Exclusive Economic Zone, the band of oceans stretching from 3 to 230 miles out, where the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act gives the federal government top rights. Florida can clean its sand. It can't, on its own, allow commercial harvest in the water where the catch would actually pay off. Catching the mats offshore is the only model that scales. Once sargassum hits the surf, it starts to rot, losing valuable compounds within hours and picking up sand and trash that interferes with the downstream processing. The biomass has to be caught in open water while still alive and routed to a plant before it breaks down. Doing that needs a federal sign-off, which doesn't exist. State legislators in Florida, Texas, and Louisiana have explored a workaround where they could run a multi-state setup inside the 3-mile state limit and challenge the federal claim in court. Bills to clarify federal sargassum rules have been drafted by congressional staff more than once. They never made it to a vote. Not because of a coordinated campaign against them, but just because nobody cared. Sargassum has no real lobby in Washington. The cleanup contractors do, though. This is where the whole story becomes absurd. Federal harvest of sargassum is already banned, and has been since 2003. That year, the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council pushed through a management plan covering federal waters south of the North Carolina and South Carolina border, the exact stretch every Florida and Gulf bloom passes through. The rule was meant to protect mahi-mahi nurseries and sea turtle habitat, and treats sargassum like a regulated fish stock. The specific limits, taken together, read almost like a joke. The federal cap on annual sargassum harvest from all U.S. South Atlantic waters is 5,000 pounds wet weight for the whole region per year. That cap was written in 2003. The Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt didn't exist then. The law protecting the seaweed was written to protect an ecosystem that the bloom had not replaced. The bloom dumps over 38 million tons on those same waters every year. The legal cap only allows the removal of a tiny fraction of what actually washes ashore each year. It's so small it barely registers against the total volume coming in. And it gets stricter from there. Harvest is only allowed from November through June to protect sea turtles. An official observer must be on board every single boat. No harvest is allowed within 100 miles of shore. Nets are limited to a 4-inch stretch mesh on a frame no bigger than 4 feet by 6 feet. Florida's own rules sit on top of all that. State residents can move up to 100 pounds of sargassum from canals or nearshore state waters under a recreational fishing license. Anything more than that requires a commercial saltwater products license. The State Department of Environmental Protection adds another layer, requiring a coastal construction control line permit for any cleanup that uses heavy equipment. Hand tools are exempt, but tractors are not. So a Florida resident can scoop sargassum off the beach with their hands. A startup trying to scale that work hits 3 barriers in a row: a federal ban, a state license check, and a beach permit. All before they even buy a boat. The federal government banned the harvest 20 years before the bloom even became a crisis, and the state cannot override the federal ban. The cleanup contractor is the only legal route the seaweed has. The bloom that escaped the Sargasso Sea is now changing it. As sargassum production in the tropical Atlantic has grown, the chemistry and structure of the gyre itself has begun to shift. Juvenile sea turtles spend their early years drifting in the seaweed are now encountering an ecosystem unlike the one their species evolved in. Fish species found nowhere else on Earth, the ones that live entirely within this rotating gyre, are adapting to conditions with no historical precedent. A sea with no shore is being reshaped by the very bloom it produced. The gyre that Columbus described is no longer behaving the way it did when he encountered it. And the response from the country most affected by what escaped that gyre is a tractor and a landfill. There's 3 ways this can end. The first is that nothing changes. The bloom keeps growing, cleanup bills climb, and foreign supply chains lock in until the window for an American industry shuts for good. That's the path of doing nothing. And as of 2026, it's the current path. The second is a state breakaway. Florida, Texas, and Louisiana have the pain and the coastline to act on their own. They could run a multi-state setup inside the 3-mile state waters line and file a court fight against the federal claim. The path is hard, but not blocked. The momentum is real, and it's also slower than the global market is moving. The third way is one federal bill. Multiple draft bills already exist in congressional offices, and they all circle the same core structure. One would name a lead federal agency responsible for sargassum management. Another would create a clear legal pathway for commercial harvesting instead of treating all sargassum as waste by default. And a third would set standards for offshore extraction so companies know exactly what is permitted. The framework draws directly from systems the United States already uses for offshore wind and mineral leasing, and the economic case has already been laid out repeatedly by university researchers with no financial stake in the outcome. All that's missing is authorization. The vote will come when the next record bloom hits national news. The 2026 data already points there. Photos of buried Florida beaches will reach a scale that breaks tourism numbers. Cleanup costs in one county will climb to an embarrassing total. The window will open, and that moment is drawing closer. The sargassum story is not the first time this pattern has played out. The same play has run on every big American resource fight in the last 30 years. It usually ends the same way. The United States led solar photovoltaic research through the 1990s. Bell Labs built the first practical silicon solar cell. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado set the efficiency standards the rest of the world still uses. Then China built the factories. As of 2026, Chinese manufacturers control more than 80% of global solar panel output. And American utility-scale solar runs on imported panels. Lithium-ion battery chemistry came out of American and Japanese labs in the 1970s and 80s, with foundational work coming from the University of Texas, Stanford, and Oxford. Sony brought the first commercial battery to market in 1991, and American consumer electronics drove the early demand. Today, China makes around 75% of the world's lithium-ion batteries, and American electric car builders are racing to build the home plants they should have started 20 years ago. The pattern constantly repeats itself. American labs do the science and demonstrate the value, and American agencies struggle to agree on how to build anything with it. Meanwhile, countries with a single decision-making structure move faster. One plan becomes one set of factories and supply chain. By the time Washington recognizes the opportunity, the infrastructure has already been built elsewhere, and the US is left with the research, but not the industry. But sargassum is different. Solar panels need silicon wafers, factory floor space, and skilled labor to compete. Lithium batteries need cobalt mines and nickel refineries. Money moves resources, but the Atlantic bloom moves itself. It lands on Florida sand regardless of Washington's will. Free biomass ships itself straight to the beach. That probably makes sargassum the easiest of these fights to win. The hardest part of every other resource race has been getting the raw material to American shores. With sargassum, the raw material is already doing the job. America just bans itself from picking it up. Pharma-grade alginate goes into wound dressings, drug capsules, dental molds, and surgical tools, and the supply pipe runs almost entirely through Chinese plants. That setup already triggered defense procurement reviews during the pandemic. A home sargassum biorefinery line along the Florida and Gulf Coast would not kill that dependency outright. It would, at minimum, build a parallel industry the country currently doesn't have. A mid-sized biorefinery sized for 100,000 tons of wet sargassum a year would handle about what Miami-Dade and Broward now dump together. Startup costs run somewhere between $80 and $120 million, covering the plant, the boats, and the extraction line. Sales then come from a product mix, with total revenue running from $40 to $70 million a year at speculative 2026 prices. Payback under 5 years is doable. The money is ready, the buyers are waiting, the biomass shows up every year by ocean current. Only one piece is missing, and it's a piece of paper. A law that names the lead agency, a law that sets the permit clock, a law that says how a company places a bid. That law eventually will get written. The only open question is whether it comes before the global supply chains lock America out again. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.